Hey, welcome back. This video is made purely for education and entertainment. No shortcuts taken, just research and a lot of late nights. Now let's get into it. Back in 1965, an illustration was printed in a book series that ended up shaping how millions of people picture human evolution. You've probably seen it even if you don't know the name. A hunched, hairy ape on the far left, slowly straightening up step by step, until on the far right stands a tall, confident modern man holding a spear. It's clean, it's satisfying, it's also almost entirely wrong. Anthropologists have spent decades trying to undo the damage that single image caused, because evolution was never a straight line marching toward improvement. It was messy. It branched constantly. Different species existed side by side, some thriving for millions of years, some vanishing almost as soon as they appeared, and plenty of them never even crossed paths with each other despite living on the same planet. Here's a comparison that might help. Right now, today, there are a dozen different species of fox walking around on Earth at the same exact time. Desert foxes, Arctic foxes, tiny foxes, foxes built for snow, and foxes built for sand. Nobody assumes one fox species is a more evolved version of another. They're just cousins, living their own separate lives in their own separate corners of the world. Human evolution worked the same way. There wasn't one line of increasingly better humans. There was a sprawling family tree with multiple branches of ancient humans alive at the same time, each one adapted to its own environment, its own challenges, its own way of surviving. So today, we're doing something a little different. We're taking several of these ancient human species, real fossils, real discoveries, real mysteries, and we're ranking them. Not by who's best, because that's a meaningless question when you're comparing a species that survived 2 million years against one we only know from 3 teeth and a finger bone. Instead, we're judging each one on survival length, adaptability, brain power for their time, and honestly, how much they broke our assumptions the moment we dug them up. Some of these species will rank high purely because they refuse to die. Others will rank high because they're so strange that scientists still argue about where to even place them. Let's start at the beginning. Australopithecus afarensis. About 6.5 million years ago, there was a single population of ape-like primates that hadn't yet split into what would become the human branch and what would become the chimpanzee branch. From that population came generations of experiments, branching and splitting for millions of years before anything resembling a modern human showed up. Afarensis was one of those experiments, and its most famous member is a fossil basically everyone has heard of. Lucy. Lucy's skeleton was around 40% complete when researchers found her, which for a fossil over 3 million years old is remarkable. She got nicknamed the missing link almost immediately, and that nickname is still wrong to this day. There isn't one single link connecting apes to humans, because the tree doesn't work that way. What Lucy actually proved was something quietly huge. Her hips and leg bones showed she walked upright on 2 legs, despite having a brain barely bigger than a modern chimpanzee's. For a long time, researchers assumed big brains came first and walking came later. Lucy flipped that assumption completely. Walking evolved long before big brains did. She doesn't have tools, she doesn't have fire, but she rewired an entire field of science with one fossil. That earns her a spot in B tier, not the flashiest life by our standards, but an absolutely massive scientific legacy. Homo habilis, discovered in the early 1960s, habilis earned the nickname handyman almost instantly, because researchers were convinced this was the very first hominin species to intentionally shape stone into tools. Its brain sat around 610 cubic centimeters, noticeably bigger than afarensis, and its finger bones show the kind of precision grip you'd need to actually make something on purpose rather than just swinging a random rock. But here's where it gets interesting. In 2011, archaeologists uncovered stone tools at a site called Magpie 3 in Kenya, and those tools dated back roughly 3.3 million years, a full 700,000 years before Homo habilis is even believed to have existed. Neither afarensis nor any known species from that era was supposed to be capable of intentional tool making, so somebody 700,000 years earlier than the so-called first toolmaker was already fracturing stone with purpose. We don't know who. That mystery toolmaker is still out there in the historical record, completely unidentified, quietly undermining habilis's claim to the throne. Still, actually shaping a stone into a specific cutting edge is a real cognitive milestone, mystery predecessor or not. Homo habilis also lands in B tier, foundational, clever for its time, but sharing its spotlight with a ghost. Homo erectus. If this list were purely about survival, erectus wins by a landslide with nobody else even close. This species existed from roughly 2 million years ago until as recently as 117,000 years ago. For comparison, our own species has only existed for around 300,000 years total. Erectus was already ancient history before we even arrived, and then kept surviving for another 100,000 years after we showed up. Erectus was also the first human species to leave Africa entirely, with remains discovered across Africa, Asia, and Europe. Height varied wildly depending on region, from around 5 feet to 6 feet tall. One of the most complete early human skeletons ever found, nicknamed Turkana, stood about 5'3" at the time of death. Erectus used the same basic stone tools as habilis at first, but eventually developed a more advanced toolkit, requiring real symmetry and precision, sharp cleavers and small scrapers, clearly built for slicing meat into manageable pieces. Here's the part that gets me every time. At a site called Dmanisi in Georgia, researchers found the skull of an elderly Erectus individual who had lost every single tooth long before death, with the tooth sockets fully healed over. That means other members of his group were keeping him alive, chewing or softening his food for him for what was likely years. Altruism, real group care for someone who could no longer contribute physically, shows up in Erectus long before we'd expected. On top of that, Erectus is one of the earliest species confirmed to have controlled fire, with evidence from Wonderwork Cave dating back roughly 1 million years. Someone in that cave kept a fire burning, and we still don't know exactly how they started it. Nearly 2 million years of survival, global expansion, evolving tools, and evidence of genuine compassion. Homo erectus takes the crown here. S here, no argument. Homo naledi. This one is a genuine head-scratcher, and I mean that as the highest compliment. In September 2013, a caver squeezed through an 18-centimeter wide crack deep inside a cave system in South Africa and stumbled into a chamber nobody had ever properly explored. His headlamp landed on a bone, then more bones, then half a skull. What followed was one of the largest single collections of ancient human fossils ever found in Africa, over 1,500 bone fragments from at least 15 individuals, all recovered from a chamber that only a few dozen people have ever physically entered since. The dating on Naledi is a mess, and not because researchers are bad at their jobs. It's genuinely unclear. Some estimates place it around 2 million years old. Others place it as recently as 240,000 years ago, which would mean Naledi was potentially alive at the same time as both Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens. Its brain was tiny, somewhere between 460 and 610 cubic centimeters, only slightly bigger than a modern chimpanzee's, and yet it had a human-like wrist suggesting fine tool use, alongside curved fingers suggesting it was still climbing trees regularly, ape shoulders, human hands, a brain the size of a grapefruit, possible evidence of deliberately placing bodies deep inside a hard-to-reach cave system, which some researchers interpret as intentional burial behavior we wouldn't expect from a brain that small. Naledi refuses to fit anywhere clean on the family tree, and that's exactly why it earns a high spot here. It challenges the core assumption that bigger brains automatically mean more complex behavior. A tier, not for brain power, but for completely breaking our expectations of what a small-brained hominin was capable of. Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit for obvious reasons. Floresiensis stood only about 3 to 3.5 feet tall on average, discovered in a cave on the Indonesian island of Flores in 2003. Its brain case measured somewhere between 380 and 420 cubic centimeters, roughly chimpanzee size, and genuinely comparable to an Australopithecine from 3 million years earlier. Every other hominin species alive around the same time had a brain 2 to 3 times larger. That's bizarre for 50,000 years ago. The likely explanation involves something called insular dwarfism. Flores has always been geographically isolated, with no land bridge connecting it to the rest of Indonesia, meaning Floresiensis's ancestors, probably descended from Homo erectus, likely arrived by accident on floating debris. Once stranded on an island with limited resources, larger body size becomes a liability rather than an advantage. Smaller individuals need less food to survive, so over generations, population shrank. It wasn't just the hominins either. An actual pygmy elephant species lived alongside them on Flores, standing only about 4 feet tall. Floresiensis reportedly hunted Komodo dragons, giant rats, and that same pygmy elephant alongside forage plants. And the species left such a deep mark on local culture that Flores folklore still describes a small, hairy, language-murmuring creature called the Abu Gogo, said to steal food and children from nearby villages, even now. A species so strange it became local legend. A tier.